Hello, and welcome to No Direction, episode 112, Owen to Gen Con.
I'm your host, Ryan Costello.
And I'm Jefferson J. Thacker, also known as Parent.
Our guest tonight wears more hats than a gentleman Etten. Among them are Pathfinder developer for Paizo and Rogue Genius Games genius. He is Owen K.C. Stevens. Welcome to the show, Owen.
Thank you very much. Hi, folks.
Owen, it's been a while since you've been on, so welcome back, I guess, is in order, but it's practically your first time.
Yes, it's been quite a while.
In fact, for someone as prolific as you, it feels strange that you're not on basically every single week.
I wouldn't have time to be on every single week.
But you make the time for other things, Owen.
I do. It's very true. We can try and fit you in more regularly. That'd be fine.
We'll talk about this after the fact. But why don't you update us on what you've been doing at Paizo for the last year?
Sure. So I was hired as a in-office developer last year. I started around about April. And at first I was mostly developing the Pathfinder modules line. But then Patrick Rennie, who was the developer who was handling the player companions, moved on to work elsewhere, and so I took over the player companions. That's what I've been doing all of this year, pretty much, is conceiving them, getting them approved, outlining them, assigning them, and developing them when they come in. So that's the majority of my work. I also was the host of RPG Superstar last year, and I'm continuing to work on refining how we're handling RPG Superstar going forward. Although a lot of people work on RPG Superstar, many of them behind the scenes, so there's a lot of people making sure that goes smoothly. But it is one of the things I really enjoy doing at Paizo, because it's an opportunity to talk to and meet people and interact with the community a lot.
Like you said, you started with the Pathfinder modules line. This is when it was bumped up to 64 pages from 32 pages, correct?
Yeah, and it was bumped up about a year before I came on, and there were several out, Dragon's Den and such, that were before I came along. But the first one I was involved with was Peril and Plunder, Plunder and Peril, which is a tie-in to the adventure card game. It also ties into Skull and Shackles. It is also 3 individual short adventures that you can either run by themselves, or you can run them as a longer interconnected set. So it was a fairly complex bit of adventuring to be the first thing I tried to get under my belt there.
And I remember... Sorry, Pam, go ahead.
I want to remind our audience that we are doing this show live, and if you are in the Twitch chat right now, and for viewers at home, you can do that by going to twitch.tv/NoDirection. We'll be taking questions from the chat and asking them to our excellent guest here. So just monitor, just keep chatting, and we'll be paying attention to it and pulling you in.
What I was still continuing to talk about the modules line, Owen, it felt like it had a lot of enthusiasm behind it when you took over with like card tie-ins and whatnot, and a lot of that seems to have died down. Is it just because there's no one that's taking it on as a champion right now, or what happened there?
Well, the Pathfinder modules line has always been a bit of an odd bird out. We have the adventure paths, which are a series of 6 connected adventures. We do a single storyline. Every adventure path starts right after the previous one. They're extremely popular, and they always have a series of themes. The Pathfinder modules line is a place where we can be a little more experimental, and some experiments play out really well, and others don't necessarily. So there was definitely a lot of excitement to do something tied into the card game, but for example, the next card game they did is another thing that's based off one of the adventure paths. And while we did do Plunder and Peril, we don't necessarily want to revisit every adventure path in the modules line. Those are adventures that have already been done. A lot of people have already played through them. This was a special case where we had a lot of new material from the card game that we wanted to interject into the role-playing side of things. And there are people who aren't fans of how much ship-to-ship combat there is in the second of the Skull and Shackles adventures. I personally enjoy it, but if you don't, this was an opportunity to have an alternate plot line that still got you from the first to the third adventure. But those are special circumstances. Just we're not going to need to do that every time there's a new adventure card game. And it does turn out that's a lot of moving parts to try and track. We still have a Nick Logue adventure that is on the schedule that's coming out, and certainly Nick Logue always brings a lot of excitement, and there's a lot of neat, fun stuff going on in that. I'm not actually the developer on that, but I oversaw the early days of it and sent in some revisions for him and such. So I really look forward to seeing what that ends up being. And then after that, we have Down the Blighted Path, which is going to be Monica Marlowe's Superstar adventure for the 2015 Superstar, which started last year and ended this year. But unlike a lot of our lines, if we have to alter exactly what we're doing or exactly when something comes out on the Pathfinder modules, we don't impact a lot of other things. If you skip a part of an adventure path, every adventure path after that is impacted. If we are doing a series of tie-ins with the campaign settings, Mark Moreland mostly oversees, if that is missed, then there's an opportunity lost because we were specifically tying that into other products that come along. With the modules, if we change up the publishing order or we decide we're going to try a new format, for the most part, that doesn't impact the rest of the module line or the other lines. So that freedom means that sometimes we step back and we say, we're going to retool this, we're going to take a look at it, we're going to decide what we're going to do with it. And that is one of the things we're continuing to do. There isn't a single developer overseeing it, but actually for a lot of our things, all the developers have a fair amount of experience. We all know what we're doing with them, and we want to have the flexibility so that you don't have one person who's stuck doing one thing all the time, which could lead to burnout. As it happens, I'm really excited with the player companions at the moment, so my focus is very much there, but I'm certainly not the only person that's doing it. I had Amanda Hammond recently helped me with one, and before that Crystal Frazier helped me with one, and of course the freelancers are writing them, and we may well have other people develop them, individual ones going forward. So you kind of have to look at what your resources are and what needs you have and what people are responding positively to and retool as necessary.
When did you take over the Player Companions line? What was your first book?
That's an actually slightly complicated question because at first I was helping Patrick, I think starting back with Melee Tactics maybe, so there were several that he had assigned and he had outlined and he started developing and I helped him wrap up with. The first one that I assigned that was something that I was overseeing from start to finish was the Dirty Tactics Toolbox. But even that was something that was already on the schedule. I think the first thing that is going to be something that I pitched, I believe, is going to be Heroes of the Street.
And Dirty Tactics isn't out yet, right? It's imminent?
It is imminent, I believe. It's weird. I always knew exactly when these things were out new when I was a fan and I was reading them because I had my subscription and I'd grab the PDF and I know exactly what it was. Now, to me, Dirty Tactics Toolbox is something that we dealt with months or weeks ago, and I don't get my copy until much later, but I have access to the PDF and I've got all my notes and anything I need I've got. So I am not as perfectly up to date on what has actually been released or not as perhaps I should be.
Well, I don't have Dirty Tactics in my hand yet, so I'm going to assume that it's not out yet. Not that I get everything right when it comes out, but that's actually what I've been looking forward to. So why don't you sell it on me even more? What's so great about the Dirty Tactics toolbox?
So we'd already done the melee weapons toolbox and the ranged weapons toolbox, and those were opportunities for people that had a character of any class or background, but that had a particular tactic, right? I like to get up close and personal, or I prefer to stay at range, and give them something, and also talk about how those tactics evolve and operate within the world of Galarian. One of the nice things about the player companions is that they are specifically tied to the Inner-Sea region, so that we can say, you know, an Eldori Swordlord is not just a generic person who's good at fighting. That is a specific group with a specific cultural heritage and a specific tradition. The Dirty Tactics Toolbox, of course, we get to worry a little less about upstanding citizens like Eldori Swordlords and talk more about poisoners from Daggermark and people who are into ambushes and sneak attacks, and of course the Dirty Tricks combat maneuver, because Dirty Tactics Toolbox is practically named for the Dirty Trick. So we took apart Dirty Trick, we looked at how it operated, we looked at a lot of the feats that play off of it, and we thought, what can we do to make Dirty Trick even dirtier and something that brings fun to the game? Because that is one of the most flexible maneuvers that represents all those things that you always see in movies and in television shows, but that frequently role-playing games just don't have a quick way to handle that sort of ad hoc issue, right? I throw sand in someone's eyes. Well, sure, in a desperate moment you may throw sand in someone's eyes, but how exactly do we handle that in a game? And it has a series of specific things you can do with it. We've expanded some of that with Dirty Tactics Toolbox, but it also is something that the GM can look at and say, yeah, okay, we're going to call that a dirty trick, and you will have this effect and move on quickly, which is one of the things I really appreciate about it. We had a lot of fun playing with that. We had a lot of fun playing with poisons. We've got a lot of new poisons in there, and some poisons that do new things. And then we had some dirty trick and poison spells, which are they're magic for a lot of the classes, but they're specifically themed around doing nasty, unpleasant, and perhaps not particularly morally upstanding things to people. It was a lot of fun to write. I think the freelancers had a lot of fun doing it. We also have a section that I know a lot of people are looking forward to that talk about races that have a tradition or perhaps just a reputation for pulling unfair tricks on people, and looking at specific things they do and how they operate.
Gnomes?
You get the book.
I am getting the book.
Get the book and look and see if there are things for gnomes.
We've got Alex.
Just in case anyone ever thought gnomes pulled dirty tricks.
Go ahead, Bram.
We got Alex Agunas in chat has informed us that Dirty Tactics got pushed to August, so it's probably part of that 2-month product block that I'll get swallowed into Gen Con.
Oh no!
Yeah, a lot of stuff's going to... You know, a lot of things have impacted the schedule. Gen Con is really early this year, and that just... It's not just a matter of having product ready for Gen Con, right? We have to know, what are we shipping to Gen Con? What is everyone's schedules for Gen Con? Where are people staying for Gen Con? Does the company actually need to send everyone for Gen Con? Last year, I was sent by Paizo and spent most of Gen Con in the Sagamore Ballroom, which was an awesome experience. I got to talk to a lot of the volunteers and see how much time and effort these volunteers are putting in to Pathfinder Society to allow other people to have fun. And that was really actually moving for me. I love this hobby. But this year, they just don't need everybody, and as a result, I'm going to get to go to Gen Con on my own dime as a private citizen. I will be doing the Winning RPG Superstar Seminar, which I believe is Thursday, and Adam Daigle will be there. And anyone that has any interest in Superstar whatsoever, I strongly recommend you show up. Even if you've heard us give the seminar before, we're going to be saying things you haven't heard before and have information that hasn't been released before that. So I strongly recommend, if you can, take the time to go to it. But I'm going to get to knock about and be a fan at Gen Con, and I haven't gotten to do that in a long time, so I'm really looking forward to it. But that, just having Gen Con start in July just impacts the scheduling going all the way back to May, really.
So how much of Gen Con for you has become sitting in a smoke-filled dark room as scared freelancers humbly come towards you?
None of it yet. I did have a new experience last year, which has never happened before, which is that freelancers who I have never met in person, and in many cases don't know what they look like, would stop me in the hallway and say, Owen Stevens, right? And I'm like, yes. I'm like, hey, I'm whoever it is, and I've worked with you on this thing, and we had this email conversation. I'm like, oh, yeah, sure, hi, how are you doing? I always like putting a face to a name. That's a lot of fun, and it's very helpful. And these are my people. I enjoy hanging out with them. But they would frequently bring the conversation around to, are you going to have anything you're passing out? Is there any Pathfinder module coming up? And I remember being on the other end of that conversation. That's mostly what I did at Gen Con for 15 years, is find editors and developers and say, so if there's any work coming. But I'd never been on the other end of that, and so it's very interesting. But I think dark and smoke-filled rooms mostly aren't the way that gets handled. We do have some get-togethers. People find us at events. People talk to us before and after seminars. And they also just stop you in the hallway. But it's really a pretty friendly, congenial atmosphere. And the fact that you can go to a local restaurant that has geek movies playing in the bar and posters from War Machine hanging on the wall, right? It's a very pro-gamer environment, and it just makes the whole thing seem a lot more normal and natural to be going, sure, we're going to have the following player companions come up, drop me a line, maybe you're a good match for something, etc.
Well, since you handle a whole lot of freelancers and you've been on both sides of this, I know that many aspiring freelancers watch the show. So what do you think is a good way for freelancers to conduct that contact point?
So, first of all, there's a question of appropriateness. Don't interrupt someone while they're eating. Don't interrupt some other conversation, right? Just be polite. Stopping someone in the hallway is great, but if they say, hey, I gotta go, come catch me at some other point later, let them go, because we've got schedules, we've got to go to things. I think it's a good idea if you've had contact with them before to remind them who the heck you are. Early on, I had written for Dragon and Dungeon, and so when I was talking to people about Pathfinder stuff, I was able to say, I wrote this article for you in Dragon, talking to Wes Schneider, for example, or Sean Reynolds, who's there at the time. This is the stuff I've done, and I'd like to do more stuff like that. So a quick reminder is useful. Have a business card with your contact information on it. Give it to them. There are 3 good reasons for this. 1, it looks professional. 2, it will inspire them to give you their business card, which gives you their contact information. And 3, while no, it's not likely that I'm going to go shuffling through the business cards I got from Paizo to try and look someone up, it does happen occasionally. And if I think, we mentioned Alex Agunas, right? If I find myself thinking, hey, we had this awesome conversation about Kitsune, I've got a section of Kitsune coming up in this book, I've read some of his stuff, he's good, I don't think I've got his email. I can go to my cards and flip through them. And while that's sort of a long shot, that's an opportunity you don't want to miss. So have a business card. It's also a great way when someone is having to walk away to say, great, here's my business card, I'll drop you a line later. And then when you do, they're like, oh yeah, he's that guy that gave me this business card, I've got it right here, I remember him. And being remembered is important. I think the best way to get freelance work in this industry is to put your name in front of the people who are able to hire in a positive light as often as possible. If someone is stuck in a booth and it's 105 degrees because the air conditioner is broken, there's nothing wrong with saying, hey, can I go grab you a bottle of water? They may or may not be comfortable doing that, but especially if you're in that first tier where they kind of know who you are, frequently that's appreciated. You can invite people out for drinks, you can buy a drink, you can go to a meal. There are lots of ways you can schmooze. Just think to yourself, is this a positive experience for them? Right? Because what you're trying to do is get them to go, I like this person, I want to give them a chance, I want to give them work.
And just to give anyone that's looking for business cards the heads up, Vistaprint right now has a 50% off sale, and their quality is super high, it's really quick, you can get it sent to your hotel if you're worried about not getting it in time. I use Vistaprint often at work, so I recommend it.
Yeah, I mean, Paizo gives me my Paizo business cards, but for Rogue Genius Games or the publisher, we get those business cards through Vistaprint. Also, very carefully have someone that isn't you proof your business card before you send it. When we ordered my first Rogue Genius business cards, we misspelled my last name on my business card, which, honestly, no one noticed for a year. It wasn't until I was at the Green Ronin Summit, because I also work for Green Ronin, that I think Joe Carricker said, so is there really only one E in Stevens? What? No. But, of course, he's particularly a person with editing chops, but I was shocked that I've been passing out these cards. People have been referencing them, people have been using them to contact me. No one had noticed that I had misspelled my own name. So we ordered new cards, and they're cheap, they showed up quickly, but it's just, if you can possibly avoid that embarrassment, which I suffered, by all means, do so.
That reminds me, we need to get our cards ready, but I'm not sure how we can top the orc in the 10-foot by 10-foot room.
I've got some ideas. Are we going to be able to do it? Yeah, I think we'll be able to do it for this Gen Con. Now, Owen, now this isn't on the topic list, but I'm really enjoying you talking about freelancer advice. Do you mind if we kind of keep going down this route? All right. So what if you have a challenge where you do sit in a dark room and the first freelancer to, find you, solving some series of riddles, he gets something. He gets freelance work from you.
So that's actually not a challenge I would do unless I was looking for freelancers to write interesting riddles. Because the ability to track someone down and even the ability to be personable doesn't necessarily equate the ability to be a good writer. On the other hand, if people are looking to track something down and get freelance writing advice out of it, this past Sunday I did a blog on the Paizo blog that are Tales from Gen Con, where I talk about how Gary Gygax killed my character, and a lot of other things. And there's a good deal of the fact that my career path from I have sold one article to Dragon Magazine to I work for Paizo and 2 other game companies very closely maps to the sorts of things I did at Gen Con. Because as your career changes, as the number of contacts you have increases, as these sorts of things you know for change, then you end up with different opportunities at Gen Con. You need to know how to look for those and take advantage of them and try and build more. The first time I went to the Ennies, I was sitting in the hallway of, I think, the second Ennies, listening to people get awards for things that I might have written 20 words for. This year I'm going to be a Dream Date at the Ennies, and not for the first time. That's still the Ennies, but it's a different experience for me. And it shows how there's a progression of how the same events can mean different things to you depending on where you are in your career.
You mentioned how Alex, you said Alex and Kitsune in the same sentence. That wasn't just a random example.
No, it's not.
Alex did a very good job of selling himself as someone who would love to do work on Kitsune stuff.
Yep.
What did he do that was so memorable to you? What can other freelancers do if they really want to work on a single thing that you might be able to help them with?
So I will warn you a little bit that you don't want to get too typecast. For a long time, I was specifically known as being good for rules crunch, which means no one ever contacted me if what they wanted was an adventure or a campaign setting section. And that can limit you in the long run. But especially if you're breaking in, or if there's something you're really, really passionate about, the best way to be known for being a good writer for something is to write for it. He does his own third-party publications. I think being a good third-party publisher is a great way to get into this industry. One of the reasons that I still do Rogue Genius Games is because it gives me the opportunity to work with people that maybe aren't ready to write for Paizo, and experience is just the best way to learn. But even if you don't have the resources to be your own third-party publisher, and you can't get the attention of any other third-party publisher, although there are a lot of us and it's not that hard to get our attention, you can write just on a blog, on Facebook, social media. Find someone else that's trying to put together a hub of writers. There's Wayfinder, which is you guys. There's the fanzine. There are lots of places where you can get your writing out there. And you can even just go and write on the Paizo forums, right? They're a place for homebrewed rule sets there, and you can talk about it. We're reading those forums. Not every developer reads every thread, but if you have a consistent progress of doing well in a particular topic, you're going to catch our attention.
You mentioned Rogue Genius Games. I think it's a good time to move on to one of the things that I'm most excited about for this interview, Feat Reference Document.
Uh-huh.
What is it?
The Feat Reference Document is a product put out through Rogue Genius Games, which takes every feat that has come out in a Paizo product that is not on the PRD, the Pathfinder Reference Document, and presents it in an open game format. And what I mean by that last bit is that there's one of the reasons a lot of those feats aren't available easily other places, or if they are, you can't find them, is that a lot of them have proprietary names, right? The game mechanics are open, but there's intellectual property tied into some of those. As an example, there's a feat called Iomede's Sword Oath. You can't, if you're using the open game license, have a feat called Iomede's Sword Oath, because Iomede is a proper noun and she is intellectual property. If you just have a feat called Sword Oath, then no one knows how to find it within your stuff, right? If they know that there's this feat and they go to your third-party reference and they try and look it up, they don't find it. So the Feat Reference Document does two things. It compiles all these things from adventures, from player companions, from campaign settings, from some of the old resources and adventures that existed even in the 3.5 era that were Galarian specific, all in one place. It scrubs them of IP. If there has been errata to them, I've done my best to put in the errated version. It reskins anything that is Galarian specific to be generic. So instead of referring to Osirian, which is a specific place in Galarian, we created Ankara, which is a imaginary open Egyptian realm that we can reference. It also does a red letter version, which is that if any word in a feat has been altered from the original, that word is highlighted. So if you are a game master who only wants to allow official Paizo material in your game, you can still pick this book up, you can crack it open, you can look at one of our feats, and if that feat has nothing highlighted, you know, oh, that's exactly the way it was in the original book. If it says this feat is only available to people who worship a lawful good deity that has the following domains available, and that deity description is highlighted, you know that originally it said some specific deity, and we have just changed that to a generic description of the deity by alignment and available domains. If you find a feat that is entirely highlighted, and I think there are 3, those are just cases where the original feat is so legendarily not functional that we actually offered an alternative, but that alternative has been highlighted as an alternative. So you can use it if you want, you cannot, that's totally up to you. And then every feat also gives a fictional resource. So you might find that there's the Wayfarer League Analects, because we had created an imaginary group called the Wayfarer League. And every feat that is from a specific Pathfinder resource, Paizo resource, will be listed as having that same fictional resource. There are 2 reasons for that. The first is, if as a GM you don't want to allow everything in this book into your campaign, you can say, well, I really only want Asian flavored stuff. So they have this imaginary land of 10,000 cranes, so if your character is from the Asian area in my game, then you have access to any resource that mentions the land of 10,000 cranes. The other advantage is that when we did our Section 15, and for people that are up on the open game license, if you use material from an open game product, you have to include the name of that in your Section 15. We did one for the entire book, but we also did a Section 15 entry for each fictional reference within that book. So if you're a third-party publisher and you use a single feat, you don't have to use our 5-page Section 15. You can go, that feat is from this sectional resource. I grab that fictional resource, I look and see what the Section 15 is for that fictional resource, and I can just add those few lines to my Section 15. So we're of the opinion that that makes this a much more usable third-party product. It is designed to support Pathfinder, and it only exists because Paizo is so friendly and open to supporting the third-party publishers for their game. But it was an opportunity to take a whole bunch of material, much of which is really, really, really cool, that is just in the corners of places, right? People don't tend to think about that one feat that is in that one the third adventure and adventure path. There's a lot of flavor in a lot of those, and there's a lot of neat opportunities to have interesting characters, and there just hasn't been a good indexed resource, and it's available both as a PDF and on drive-thru. We've got a print on demand in hardback. So that you can have it, flip through it. If you prefer print product, you can look at it, feel it, and it gives you an opportunity to use all of that. And then the only other really add-on I want to add to it is that if the feat references a set of rules that aren't in the feat themselves, like there are feats for Imperial Lord obediences, and it tells you that you get an obedience depending on your Imperial Lord, but the feat itself doesn't reference exactly what all of those are. We have an appendix that has all of the rule sets. So if you're dealing with flesh crafting, or dragon crafting, or obediences for Imperial Lords, or gods, or pantheons, that's all in the book. So it's an all-inclusive resource that everything you need to use that specific feat is in there.
Now, when you when I bought this product right away as soon as you launched it. Actually, that's not entirely true. I waited until the print bundle was available, then immediately ordered it because it was awesome. And I was surprised that you said you'd highlight it. I was like, that's a great service. That way I know to look things up and cross-reference them. My interest in this isn't as a third-party publisher, even though it seems to be the best use of it, but just for referencing. And then I was surprised at the ridiculous number of highlights in here. Like, I didn't expect there to be that many changes. And that first led me to two thoughts. One, you guys worked your butt off to make this thing.
There was a lot of work to make this OGL compliant, yes.
Yes. And secondly, I went to look for analogs of that in the other companion material, and I don't see it. Like, the spells aren't nearly as bad. So why are the feats so super specific, and everything else just sort of can go either way?
Well, some spells are, right? I mean, if you were to look at, like, Inner Sea Magic, that's one of the places where we actually have spells that are like Abadar's Truth-Telling, right? That is specifically named after a specific god, and you would have to either call it A's Truth-Telling or just Truth-Telling, because you can't use... But one of the great uses of feats as a storytelling device are to use feats as ways to show the differences between groups and nationalities and organizations and traditions. And so if you're doing that, if you're talking about feats that tie into the worship of a specific god, or feats that are part of a specific fighting style, or feats that are part of an alien outlook of dwarves, for example, you're going to mention those things in the feat. And when you do that, that's how the intellectual property gets embedded in there. And that's a great thing for Paizo to be doing. I kind of wish even the spells had more of this as a Pathfinder player, because that's the flavor. That is where you've got the role-playing instead of just the game. Right? Power Attack is a great and useful feat. You can tell a story around Power Attack, but Power Attack is not as interesting as Iomede's Sword Oath, right? If I've got a character that has Iomede's Sword Oath, that tells you more about who that character is, what they believe in, how they've been trained. And so, yes, we had to call it Io's Sword Oath, which means the same alphabetical place in the listing. You'll find it if you look for it. But it's a place where you can interject that sort of character element, my background, my story, who is my character, and just define those differences with rules rather than having the rules be entirely a dry recitation of bonuses and options. And I think, especially with the player companion and campaign setting lines, the developers who came before me have done a great job of interjecting that flavor into those places. And that is one of the reasons why I wanted to create a compilation, a reference document for those feats so that people would be able to look through it. And, you know, you can't bring this to a Pathfinder Society game and use it as your reference because it's not a Paizo book. But if you're a Pathfinder Society player, you can pick this up, you can look through it, you can find stuff you like. You can then cross-reference what book that's in, get that book, and use that for your character to make a more interesting, more different character who does things maybe a little differently from the fighter right next to you.
It is a compilation, and one of the issues with a compilation is that as soon as a new book comes out, it's no longer complete. So how is the feat reference document going to handle that?
The current plan is roughly every quarter, so we're actually kind of coming up on when it should happen. We will be updating the PDF automatically, so if you've bought the previous PDF, you'll just get a new PDF that will have the update. We will probably also offer the update separately as a print product on drive-thru, so if you bought the print book, you don't have to buy another whole big print book. There's no way for a compilation ever to be 100% current all the time. One of the reasons I wanted to do this now is that we now have years and years and years of material, right? So if you want to have print versions of all these feats, instead of having to have 6 years of books, you need one book and the past 4 months. And that is simply a lot less work and building, and I think a lot of people probably have most of what they want, but they'll be missing those 3 things, right? I got almost everything, but oh, I didn't buy that player companion, and it's out of print now, right? Some of the stuff, if you want in print, there just isn't another option. There are places like Archives of Nethys and D20PFSRD.com that do a good job making just the information available, but you have to search through it. It's not indexed. It isn't, in my opinion, as OGL friendly. I mean, Archives of Nethys uses the community use, so it's not OGL compliant at all, and it doesn't have to be. And D20PFSRD.com can't use any of the IP material, and they don't have the special rules that I came up with for how to let people know what we changed, how to keep it in the alphabetical order, etc. I love both of those references, but they don't quite do what I wanted to do with this. So even if it's not entirely up to date at a given week, it still has a lot of material that is difficult to find and have in print otherwise.
Did you say Nethys? I've been saying Nethys my whole life. My whole life.
I am not claiming that that is the correct pronunciation, but
it seems chat is also asking that question.
Valerian's a big world. I assume they have accents just like we do. So Nethys, Nethys. Point is, there are archives out there, and they are useful.
We have a couple of questions from chat. I like this one that Killrex 33T, Killrex Seat. We'll just go with Killrex. He says he always wonders what is on the shelves behind people.
Alrighty. So you won't see me for a second. I'm moving my camera here. So let's see. Here on the far left, we've got reference books. Most noteworthy, I've got a big art book, National Gallery of Art, my giant storybook, several compiled readers, complete works of William Shakespeare. Down one, you have a series of miniatures. This is far from all of my miniatures, even with my reduced set. Those are things that are too big to store elsewhere or that I've worked on recently. And then going down, you get into my wife's office supplies because her desk is right there. Over here, we have what we call the Cube. This is mostly game material. I've got third-party and Freeport stuff here, board games. That's all third-party and Star Wars stuff. Those are maps. I'm not sure if you can see my finger. Yeah, you can. Miniatures, miniatures, miniatures. The Joy of Cooking and cookbooks that happen to be with more Pathfinder stuff, reference books, including a whole bunch on writing, the Dictionary of Concise Writing. I've got a book of lists, the Order of Things, which is actually over here currently. I love the Order of Things because it is nothing but a book that lists systems that are used to organize things. So it has, like, groups of royalty and genuses of animals, and it is an awesome, awesome reference that doesn't do quite what anything else does. And then I've got a whole bunch of fiction and board games and card games up there, including a lot of Edgar Rice Burroughs and E.E. Smith. And then, on these shelves, which you guys couldn't see otherwise, I have my collection of Dieselpunk miniatures that I'm working on, a lot of Dust Technics, a lot of Tannhauser, one Arabic dirk that I got from my namesake, my Uncle Owen, some Star Wars stuff, and the Wrath of the Righteous base set for the adventure card game. And that is what is on my shelves.
What is the appeal of Dieselpunk for you?
I am a big fan of pulp, and Dieselpunk, in my opinion, grew out of pulp. And I am a big fan of the World War I, World War II era. I consider those wars to have been long enough ago that it's not too soon to take new takes on them. There are still people alive who dealt with them, and you have to be sensitive to various cultures, but I think it's, at this point, fair game for the cultural mill. And I just enjoy all of the pulp-type stuff that has to be compiled in Dieselpunk, right? I did a movie night one night, which was The Rocketeer, The Phantom, and The Shadow. If that sounds like fun to you, then you are a fan of Dieselpunk, regardless of what you want to call it, because I know some people prefer to just go with pulp. And I'm a fan of World War I and World War II and war games and war reenactments. So those are just things that all combine together. One of my current big kicks is to look at alternatives to military vehicles other than tracked. There are a lot of things that were experimented with: screw wheel drives, head rails, just combat cars with reinflatable or solid tires. And these are all things that I find fascinating, and it's an opportunity to put all that together. And right now, I'm not doing any of that professionally, so this is an opportunity to just play a bit.
You do things that aren't professionally?
Yeah, this is still my favorite hobby on top of working for 3 game companies.
Huh. Scott Melville says we're doing questions, and I think we can expand on his question, but he wants to know, is a trait compendium on its way?
A trait compendium is definitely a possibility. The question whether what is on its way or not is a trickier question for a number of reasons. First of all, traits frequently need context. Campaign traits, for example, really aren't designed to be used outside the campaign that they are set up for. So, like, there are campaign traits to help deal with traps and locks and other things that were designed specifically for Mummy's Mask, because if you don't happen to have a rogue, we needed a way for groups to have those things available for their characters. But that doesn't mean that we want those in every other campaign or adventure. And they're often even more tied to the backstory. They may be actually modestly dull mechanically, but really exciting when you realize this is my tie to this group. Or, you know, I was trained by a Rift Warden. I only get this tiny bonus, but Rift Wardens are cool. Well, I couldn't give you the Rift Warden part. So even more than the feat reference document, where we created dozens of imaginary books and sources and countries and kings and leaders and groups, and for that matter, made all of those open as well, so if someone else wants to reference Ankara, they can. We'd have to do even more of that for traits, and they would be even more highlighted. So you'd be getting less of the original material. Secondly, from a practical point of view, traits don't sell well. Books of traits don't sell well. People like having a few traits sprinkled through other stuff, but the fact of the matter is, people just don't use as much traits as they do much of the other fungible bits. Most people take 2 traits when they create their character. 4 campaign or traits are allowed. While there is a feat that will let you take 2 more, almost no one ever bothers. So you're going to get a bunch of feats over the course of your career, especially if you're a fighter or someone else with bonus feats. You're going to prepare a bunch of spells over the course of your career. You're going to buy a bunch of magic items over the course of your career, and you're probably going to take 2 traits. And you're much less likely to want a book of 500 traits if you're only going to take 2.
It's true. Like, let's say I have a campaign with 6 players in it. Odds are I'm not even going to get 12 unique traits.
Right. And there are winners and losers in that, right? There are some traits that get used over and over and over. I'm actually kind of the opinion that it might be that all traits should be campaign traits, that there should be a specific set of traits for a specific adventure. Now, I like having the traits in the campaign setting book because that is for GMs that are trying to set up their own campaign. And so that's a good example of here are things you can do, but if I was GMing a game, I would still say, okay, we can use these from the campaign, the ultimate campaign, but I've also written these other ones. And the other thing is that it's a lot of work. Feats are an obvious choice. We're actually looking at doing some similar things for class options, so we might do like a barbarian reference document that takes all the stuff from all those different sources that isn't in the PRD for barbarians and alchemists and rogues are obvious choices. They've got range powers and discoveries and talents, and we may see how that goes before we put together another multi-hundred-page book that my gut feeling is, looking at the industry, just won't sell well.
I would love to get one of those class-specific books. It's something I play mostly fighters. Like, I play a very limited scope of classes, and so just having the one fighter book, that would be perfect.
Well, and of course, with our reference documents, it would still only be stuff that isn't in the PRD, right? Because I'm not trying to take away from the people that have put together those archives, and that's the go-to place for the information that is basically from the hardbacks. But yeah, there are a lot of, just as a random example, art types that fighters have available too, and there are probably some fighter-specific feats that just, it's hard to know what they all are and where to get them.
Now, what about a spells compendium or a spells reference document?
There are no current plans for a spell reference document.
Why?
The reasons for that are complex and manifold, and some of them are proprietary. So I have sort of ducked that question in the past. The short answer is that it would be stupidly huge. There are way more spells than there are feats by page count, and I think Rogue Genius would choke on it. I don't think we'd ever actually get it out.
Or rather,
the feat reference document was already sort of at the upper end of our capacity to handle that. So there are projects that you'd love to do and just aren't a good fit for the size of company you are, and that's one of them. I mean, I'd love to have it too. Someone else may come along and do such a thing. Some of that stuff, of course, gets picked up, right? You'd have to figure out what all is missing, because, for example, when Ultimate Magic came along, they picked up a lot of stuff that had been in these previous books, and when Intersea Gods came along, they picked up a lot of that stuff. So you're never sure how useful the thing you're going to be is if someone else may come along and do it in a bigger, more glorious version with the budget to put Wayne Reynolds' art on the cover, for example. But I don't know that's happening. All I'm saying is that this would be too big for a Rogue Genius product. We're experimenting with larger and larger books. We just released Anachronistic Adventures, which is 132 pages long. I think it's 180 for the feat reference document. Fall of Man as a campaign setting we did with Sheepdog Samurai, which is similarly large. But there's an upper limit. We're just not in a place where we can do a 300-page book. We need to keep putting stuff out so that we keep getting money in, and it would take so long, we'd never finish it. So there's no point in starting something I'm pretty sure we couldn't get out.
How has Feats reference document been doing as an experiment or as a product?
Good, but not great. It's a solid seller. If everyone had the mindset we would have sold it hand over fist. It would have been one of our best sellers. And it's not one of our best sellers, but it is a solid seller. It's not a failure by any accounts, but we spent more time and money putting it together than we normally would, even for a book that size, because we thought it was going to be a smash hit. And, just it isn't. And part of that is because a lot of that material is available elsewhere. It's just not indexed and useful the way I think it should be indexed and useful. So one of the reasons that we're looking at, instead of doing, another thing people ask for is an equipment reference guide. Well, that would similarly be pretty dang big, even discounting everything that's in Ultimate Equipment. One of the advantages of doing the class guides is that they might be 30 or 60 pages each, but no one of them is going to be 180 or 300 or 540 pages. And that lets us see whether or not we're going to continue to have solid sellers that we can budget and figure out how to make successful with, or if it's just an idea that we're glad we did the one and we'll continue to update it, but we're not going to be able to manage to get it going forward. And then that's the other thing, is that we don't know how the feat reference document will do. Is it going to be evergreen? Is the fact that we're going to update it going to continue to increase the number of people that are interested in it? Are they going to be willing to pay for a small price for a print expansion or update, whatever? So those are places where we are looking at whether or not there are good ways to do these things. But as much as I love to do things just for the love of the game, and I spend a lot of time and effort talking to freelancers and players in the community because I'm a big fan of the hobby, when I'm making decisions for the company, I have to make decisions that make sense for the company.
And how has, and like at any time, if you're like, that's too inside business, I understand, but how have the print versions been selling compared to the PDF?
So we do print on demand. And the thing about print on demand is that it's not going into the distribution chain, right? So it's not being sold in people's friendly local gaming stores. It's not showing up on Amazon. etc. For that matter, when I'm doing print on demand, I can only do it through drive-through because the margins make it impractical to sell it, for example, on Paizo. I could print some and take them to Paizo, but the printing cost is so big that if I then lose a cut for doing it printing drive-through and then lose a cut because as a distributor, obviously Paizo wants their cut, I end up making so little money that it's not worth taking the box and carrying it over. So it's an upsell. It's nice. I would say that our print-on-demand products sell more than the straight PDFs, but we still sell more PDFs than print of our print-on-demand products. On the other hand, we've only been doing with the bigger books pretty much this year, and one of the big reasons Rogue Genius is success for me financially is that we have a huge backstock, right? I've got more than 400 products available. I don't have to sell more than 2 or 3 of everything in order to make a decent amount of money and be able to go forward and have budget for new projects. Now, we don't sell 2 or 3 of everything. We sell, 100 of one and 50 of the next most popular, and 1 of a whole bunch and 12 of a few, and we sort of see what's doing well and what isn't. And if you notice, we have a lot of books about godlings, we have a lot of books about shadow, we have a lot of books about dragons. That's not an accident. Those are all cases where the first one did well, the second one did well, we'll continue to do it. Anachronistic adventures, the individual classes were popular enough that we put out the 132-page revised and expanded book. I've got Jenny Jarzabski, who I met at Gen Con last year in Sagamore. She's a volunteer and an officer, etc. She's writing a bestiary that we'll use for anachronistic adventures that'll be sort of things based more on urban myth and modern society legends and such, which should tie in well to our sort of 1800s to 1940 pulp focus. We've got other people that are pitching things for it. So the bigger books may have a better long-tail business plan in the print, but we don't know that yet.
We've got a few more questions for you from the audience, Bard Wannabe says, when designing feats for the player companion line, what is the thought process in designing if a feat is going to be class-specific or more generally available?
So there are a couple of things. One is that we look at a balance of how much have we given to a given group even recently, right? If we have just put out the big book of everything barbarians want, then we are less likely to do a barbarian-specific thing. Sometimes the question is, does this make sense for everyone? There are fighter-specific feats that only fighters get, and there are classes that get access to those feats as a power, which is why you write them as a feat rather than a power. Some magesses can, and war priests under limited circumstances. So it's a question of what makes sense for the ability. Who should be able to do this? Who does it make good gameplay to be able to do this? Who is it interesting to be able to do this? Who's likely to want to pay the prerequisites to be able to pick this up? And that's a lot of elements, and it's a multi-step process, right? For all of these, we outline it, we give an idea of what we want, we give it out to the freelancers. The freelancers write it, but of course the freelancers only know what's in their section. They don't know what else we've got in the pipeline and what else we have in this book, and their opinion of what makes sense may not exactly mesh up with the developers, and the developers are picked and trained and educated in doing things any way that makes sense to Paizo. Going up to our editor-in-chief and our creative director. So that's a way that we try to keep things balanced and interesting for a range of builds and a range of classes and a range of ideas. Most feats aren't class-specific. Most feats you can pick up if you just meet a set of prerequisites. Some are kind of concept-specific, because if you, for instance, have to be able to cast an arcane spell, then that's not something we're giving a fighter. It is much rarer to say, you must have this one class feature. We do it sometimes. Usually we use class features instead of class, because if we say you have to have weapon training, it is possible that we have or will write an archetype or a class that gets weapon training, rather than saying you have to be a fighter. That's sort of one of the rare examples. Another example, we've done things where you have to be an oracle, I think, because oracles have specific tie-ins to their curse and fate, etc. So there are places where we do it. Some of that is game mechanical question, and some of it is a worldview question.
Got another question here from chat that I think you've already answered with, but I just want to point this in this direction if that's true. Would Rogue Genius ever put out a Dieselpunk themed character companion?
Yes.
Okay, yes. I was thinking that there was probably resources for that in Anachronistic Adventures.
Yeah, there's a lot you can do with that in Anachronistic Adventures. I mean, Anachronistic Adventures is sort of supposed to be your generic 100% Pathfinder compatible resource for running games with a pulp theme set from maybe as early as the late 1700s, but mostly the 1800s through World War II, right? We don't get into the Atomic Age, so that's sort of the cutoff. And yeah, there's a lot of stuff in there you can use. We've got, Devil Dog as an archetype. That's something sort of Dieselpunk specific. We've got an inventor class that has figuric devices, which is where you get into, maybe you've got mechanical wings, or cybernetic augmented limbs, etc. But we tried to hit a fairly wide spread of options with that book. And then one of the ways that we try to make this flexible and usable is with Anachronistic Adventures, we've got 6 classes, things like the Enforcer, which is your professional knee breaker, the guy that, be that a soldier or a professional thug or a gritty, street-wise urban brawler, whatever it is. That's someone who's trained specifically at hurting things. But every class automatically gets an archetype, and all of the archetypes are available to all 6 classes. So while your Enforcer says, I am a trained fighter, I am someone that goes out and hurts someone, you can take Devil Dog, and that says, okay, I am a trained soldier from the roughly Diesel age, right, World War I, World War II. But you could also take that same Enforcer and take Great Detective and say, okay, I'm Archie Goodwin, I work for Nero Wolfe, or some of the modern versions of Sherlock Holmes. I know martial arts, I hit people, I can handle myself, but I am also capable of using deduction to do all this. You could take Inventor and say, I'm building myself a giant suit of armor, but I'm still going out and mostly hitting people. So with that flexibility, if we want to do a Dieselpunk setting specifically, we can say it's the same 6 classes. You don't have to change any of those. But we can have the Tesla device operator and the jetpack flyer and other Dieselpunk specific ideas as archetypes. And you'll be able to slap that on any of our classes. So if you want to say, okay, I want to play a cogitator, I like the idea of someone who's using their mind to outthink their enemy and overcome options, but I want my cogitator to be a soldier. You can do a cogitator Devil Dog, and that's the soldier who outthinks his foes and still is an expert with things like rifles and grenades, etc. So a Dieselpunk specific setting book would take some of the options, and it would give new equipment. It would probably talk about Dieselpunk appropriate magic, or possibly after Occult Adventures comes out, we might delve into psychic magic some. For Anachronistic Adventures, we instead have a different system that we call ESP, which is really designed to tap into that pulp storyline version of how mental powers tend to work. But it would be an opportunity to tie into all those things and give Dieselpunk specific examples of them, and maybe more vehicles and plot lines and campaign setups and such.
We have a pretty straightforward question from Jay Franklin. Jay Franklin 3000. Did you work on Occult Origins?
Yes, I am the developer for Occult Origins.
How about that Occult Origins?
So there's not a lot I can say about Occult Origins. We've got the solicitation text up for it. There's a forum page at Paizo.com. You can go look at that, the product page. But the book isn't out yet, and there are, teaser previews aren't out yet, if we're going to do those for that. And so it's just not a book that I can talk about a whole lot. That said, you can look at Mythic Options, or Mythic Origins, or Advanced Class Origins, and look at how we tend to do the Origins player companion that ties into the hardback. We have hinted at what psychic magic is and how it operates in books throughout Golarion, but we have not talked a lot about exactly where do you find mesmerists or sensitives or any of the other groups that are there, and how does society see them, and why, if I am a guy who's used to hanging out in Cheliax, have I not noticed that there are mesmerists around? One of the interesting things about psychics is that it's really easy for a psychic to hide who and what they are, or to be mistaken for something else, right? If you're playing a kineticist and you throw your hand at someone and they are hit by a bolt of fire, most local guardsmen are going to go, well, that's a wizard or a sorcerer. And if you do it 8 times, if they're a little smarter, they're going to go, oh, well, that's a sorcerer, and he's spamming that spell. So you don't necessarily stand out like, say, a paladin does with a fearlessness and an aura of good and the ability to summon a steed from somewhere. But we will be using this to help contextualize what are the occult classes and how do they operate over Golarion as a whole, but specifically in the Inner Sea. Where are you likely to be from? What are some options that are sort of tied specifically to this world and these settings, instead of the generic set for this is how psychic magic works in the Pathfinder role-playing game, which is really what the hardback book is.
We are coming close to our hour, so I'm just going to invite anyone else that's listening to chat that if they have any final questions for Owen. Owen, you taking any question at all, or do you want it specifically about anything?
Yeah.
All right, if you have any question for Owen, you got a couple of minutes to do that. We're going to start with Justin Sluter's question. Anything new and horrifically overpowered in the pipeline?
So, hi Justin. He's referring to the horrifically overpowered feats line. We did horrifically overpowered feats, more horrifically overpowered feats, and horrifically overpowered mythic feats. This is a book that literally says in it, these are overpowered and badly balanced. Do not use them under any circumstances. That is overstating the case, and it's overstating the case both because it's funny and because I want people to take really seriously that you can only use these if you understand how the game works well enough to understand the consequences. I didn't expect the first perfectly overpowered feats to be a big seller. I certainly didn't expect the second one to be a big seller. I really didn't expect the Mythic one to be a big seller, because Mythic sort of replaced horrifically overpowered as a way to do things. So, this line has surprised me. There is nothing currently horrifically overpowered in the pipeline. There are things I've got sketches for, including more horrifically, more overpowered, more feats. And we have a powered spells book that we've got an outline and a little bit written for. This is a case where they make money and they make sense. They are hard to write and a little exhausting, and I'll be honest with you, a little chagrining, right? Because I'm sitting there coming up with ridiculous, over-the-top, game-breaking options, and when I put them out, the general reaction is, oh, this isn't all that overpowered. We can put this in our game, that's fine.
That was our review, actually, when we reviewed it back when the first one came out. It was like, this is surprisingly not as overpowered as it says on the cover.
So, there is no feat that I can't point to and tell you why it's overpowered. But one of the things that overpowered means is if an option completely invalidates an existing option, it's overpowered, right? Dazzling someone isn't a big deal, but if I can dazzle someone every single time I hit them no matter what, that is clearly superior to dazzling critical. So that completely invalidates existing options and is thus overpowered, even if putting it in your game would not immediately mean everyone shrugs and says, well, there's no point in playing anymore. So they are game mechanically sound. I tell you what they're designed to do and what the prerequisites for them are, so there is actually a power scale, even a horrifically overpowered power scale, and give clear mechanics so that you know how they operate. And there are games where that's perfectly appropriate, but only the GM can pick that. It's sort of like the Gestalt rules, which I don't think anyone's published Gestalt for Pathfinder, but a lot of us have Unearthed Arcana, and we perfectly want to know how Gestalt works. Gestalt is horrifically overpowered. There is, if I can do Gestalt or any other reasonable option, clearly I will pick. There's no feat that I would say, no, I'll take this feat instead of Gestalt. You'll always take Gestalt. It's like Mythic tiers, right? You can take Power Attack, or you can have one rank of a Mythic tier. Well, of course I'll take a rank of a Mythic tier. You can do a game where Gestalt characters or Mythic characters, or I actually ran a 16th level game for Gestalt Mythic characters. You can do that. But as a GM, you have to be prepared for, I rolled a 2, so I hit an AC of 94, and I do 806 points of damage. As long as you've got a game where that is still fun, that's fine. I'm not here to tell anyone how to have fun. There are times where cutting the mountain in half or having someone scream his power level is over 9,000 is fun, but it does not play well with the normal assumptions of the game. And that is really what we mean with horrifically overpowered. It will not play with the normal assumptions of the Pathfinder role-playing game. We may do more, but I don't have anything on the schedule at the moment, and the stuff that we've worked on, we've only sort of sketched. I'll be honest, being hired by Paizo takes more than 40 hours out of my freelancing schedule. I also work for Green Ronin. That takes a significant number of, a two-digit number of hours out of my weekly schedule. Just being the publisher for Rogue Genius takes a ton of time, even when I'm not the one writing. And I write a lot of what we do, not as much as I used to, but I still write a lot of it. And some projects are just not going to happen quickly.
Well, speaking of Green Ronin, Alex Agunas asks, what do you do at Green Ronin?
I am the Pathfinder developer. So I am the person that pitches Pathfinder-compatible products, who puts together who the freelancers are that work on it. I oversaw the production and development of the new Pathfinder-compatible Advanced Bestiary and the more than 500-page Pathfinder Freeport Companion. I was also a writer for the Freeport book, which was before I was the developer, because that's how these things happen. It has to be written before it's developed, and I got hired after I had turned over my freelance, but before anyone had started developing everything. And we're looking at releasing some shorter PDFs. Hopefully it'll be tied into the world of Freeport, that will put us back in the publishing things regularly. Green Ronin sort of started its Pathfinder support with two huge hardbacks, one of which is the biggest book Green Ronin has ever done. The new Freeport book is massive, and it gives you everything you need to know about the city, all the way down to the who works at what bar level in many cases. Tons of NPCs, but it also has new classes that are designed for Freeport. It's got specific insanity rules for the sort of Eldritch Cthulhian element. It's got a lot of spells that work with the fact that it's sort of a nasty, urban, nautical, Eldritch horror setting. There are some very specific things that go together with that might not make sense elsewhere. So even if you're just looking for a new set of player options, it works well for that. But it's a complete setting book. If you've got the core rulebook of this, you can run a campaign for a long time quite happily. But again, as I was talking about, books that size can choke a company, and Green Ronin is much, much, much bigger than Rogue Genius, and much, much, much smaller than Paizo. The three companies I work for are sort of the three ultimate tiers of where you can be in these things. And a 540-page book isn't the norm from Green Ronin for a reason. So we're looking at doing some smaller, more easily digested content, which also means that fans and patrons and gamers can, instead of saying, well, I don't know if I want to buy a 540-page book, oh look, a 9-page PDF. I'll try a 9-page PDF. This topic looks interesting. I'll see if I like it. And that will do them a better idea of what Green Ronin is doing and what we're planning to do and support going forward.
Now I want to play an Occult Pirate.
Of course you want to play an Occult Pirate. And I gotta say, the Occult Adventures is going to tie into Freeport really, really, really well in ways that I really can't talk about yet, because while some of the PDFs for Occult Adventures are out, it's not generally digested by the public yet, and so I'm certainly going to allow Paizo to determine how to let those previews go out rather than do it. But I think it's pretty obvious just from the titles that you can take Occult Adventures and a lot of the occult classes and psychic magic in that book and apply them to a Freeport campaign. Great.
Got a couple more questions. If you can, usually we ask you to commit to an hour. Can you handle another 5-10 minutes?
Yeah, no, I'm here for you guys.
Thanks,
Awesome.
Owen.
Thank you, Owen.
Scott Melville says, as a third-party publisher, what are the barriers to starting your own role-playing game using the OGL instead of supporting Pathfinder?
There are a couple of them. One of the biggest is that the Open Game License prohibits you from using any intellectual property, IP, which is spelled out. That includes the titles of products and product lines, and some specific names for game mechanics that the companies that have created those game mechanics have outlined as IP. If you want to do something that is designed to work with other games, you have to find a way to mention or describe those other games. If you're trying to do something that's entirely on your own, you are now competing with those other games, which are going to be better established than you. I think the most successful D20 game systems at the moment are most likely Pathfinder. Pathfinder is obviously a big company. It's well supported. It's got a lot of fans. It's got its own organized play. If you're going to do something that is like D&D and D20, Pathfinder probably has that covered. 13th Age, which goes through Pelgrane Press, I believe. They are also well established. They've got some brilliant people writing. Two of the smartest game designers I have ever known. put that book together. It's brilliant. If you're going to try and do a whole bunch of neat narrative options that change how the game plays, you probably are competing with 13th Age, and yeah, I wouldn't compete with these guys. They're just too smart. And their game is beautiful and really well done, and I highly recommend everyone pick it up.
And their names are?
Jonathan Tweet and now you're putting me on the spot. Rob Heitzu. Sorry, Rob. And the other one is going to be Mutants and Masterminds by Green Ronin, or possibly True 20, but it boils everything from D20 down to pretty much a D20 and strips away classes, strips away races, and even strips away hit points and makes everything skill checks and saving throws and powers based on tiers. And it's designed for superheroes. You can do anything you want with it, right? If you want to run a fantasy game, in fact, I think they've got a like Wizards and Warriors supplement that is designed fantasy games for Mutants and Masterminds. Competing with them would kind of be stupid. It's a well-established company. Steve Kenson is another incredibly brilliant game designer. I wouldn't want to compete with him. John Lighthouser, the developer for M&M, is a really bright, savvy guy that knows the system. I personally find it easier to support the games I want to do things similar to. Now, if you still think you've got something that is different from any of these enough that it should compete with them, and you still think it should be done under the OGL, then you are your own special genius. And I'm not saying that facetiously. They exist. There are people out there that are that smart that can come up with that option, in which case your barriers to entry become writing a book that big and getting the word out there. And those are the trick for any product, right? If you use the OGL at this point, people assume that you are going to be a clone of one of those three games I just mentioned, so you will have to both actually be different enough to be worth picking up on your own and prove that you are different enough to pick it up on your own.
Now, you mentioned that Mutants and Mastermind was OGL D20. Is that still true with 3rd edition?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Didn't realize that. My bad.
Yeah, no, it's still officially a D20 game. It still uses the OGL. Because 3rd edition is built on 2nd edition, 2nd edition is built on 1st edition, 1st edition took a lot of stuff from the OGL. I mean, you can still get the feat power attack in 3rd edition. It works differently. It has a different function. Buying a feat isn't the same. You pay a point, you get a feat, you can have kind of as many as you want as long as you don't run out of points. But it's still built on that very, very, very rough skeleton. And it is, in my opinion, the greatest proof that the OGL was good for the industry, right? Because there is very little in-play similarity between Mutants and Masterminds and any of the class and level-based D20 products. I mean, I'm obviously a huge fan of Pathfinder. I'm really happy it exists, and that my favorite iteration of D&D didn't go away. It just mutated and swapped worlds, and stuff like that happens all the time in fantasy games. But Mutants and Masterminds managed to build something really, really, really different, and I think that Steve Kenson's work on that is one of the things that puts him up in the annals of great role-playing game designers. I'm honored to even be listed on the same masthead he is at this point. So that totally different game, and there are people that love Mutants and Masterminds and hate all other D20 games. There are people that love all other D20 games and hate Mutants and Masterminds, and that right there tells you how very, very different they are. So you can use the skeleton of the OGL to do something very different. If you're sitting around going, all I really need is a list of skills and how they function, and this list is good, but everything else is changing, great. That's a fine place to start. Just make sure you're familiar with what the state of the art of D20 variants is, so that you don't end up building a heartbreak.
Just to reiterate your point about how different they are, I am actually a fan of Mutants and Masterminds and owned the books and didn't realize that it was still the same system.
Yeah.
So a couple more questions. Well, actually, one of them is just Justin Sluter saying that there is a Pathfinder Gestalt-ish book, he describes it, Magnanimous Composition Heroes from B Brothers Press. Available now on Drive-Thru-RPG.
I should have said that I wasn't aware of one from Paizo. There are a bunch of publishers, and it does not surprise me at all that someone did rules for it. But thank you, Justin, for letting us know specifically what one. A lot of people like Gestalt. I've played Gestalt games. I think they can be a lot of fun. It's just you've got to have a specific handle on what you're doing.
And finally, Mamarsula says, so I hear there's going to be something coming out in February around Valentine's Day.
That's a weird one.
Do you know?
I assumed that you knew what was being said here.
Are they talking about Paizo?
I don't know.
Don't know.
Right. Well,
Sorry.
so
I thought it
Paizo-
was self-explanatory.
Paizo does books every month, so obviously something will be coming out. There is nothing I am aware of that I am in a place where I can talk about for any of the 3 companies I'm involved with that would be a specifically intelligent answer to that particular question.
She's since clarified that it is through RGG, but I don't think that helps with the answer like that.
Oh, yeah, I don't know if that's actually going to make that publication date, but there are things that might come out roundabouts then. We'll see. But that's not something that we're currently talking about with RGG.
I think we have plants in the audience.
I don't have plants in the audience, but, you advertise stuff on Facebook, you work with freelancers, they come and see you talk.
All right, well, Mike Myler's question then will be our last one. He says, there is something big coming out next month, though, right?
Yes, so we've got Veranthia Codex coming out, and this is a project that was a joint venture between us and Mike Myler. He did a Kickstarter for it, raised thousands and thousands of dollars. He had a business plan. It was all very, very impressive. It's not something I would have tackled on my own, but I've been happy to be the publisher for it. Essentially, Mike is the design house for this, and Rogue Genius is acting as the publisher. And Veranthia Codex is a world where if what you want are insane goblin soldiers pouring out of biplanes and dirigibles across a land where you've got transforming castles and kung fu masters and rocket boot emperors, right? That's Veranthia Codex, and it is one of the most Wahoo over-the-top settings I have ever seen, and I don't have a problem with Wahoo over-the-top, and Mike did a great job of showing people what it was going to be like. So we've already started to send PDFs out to backers. Obviously, when you do that, there are always technical difficulties, but the book is much bigger than when we first started the Kickstarter. It grew quite a bit during that time. It's a sizable book. It's got a lot of useful NPC stat blocks and write-ups, a lot of new material. Mike has done his very best to cram every single creative idea he could into this book, and the stuff that has spilled out will probably be put together and put in other books going forward. But that should be coming out soon. It will be another print-on-demand and PDF product, and honestly, the book is so big, we're having trouble with our software. It's a single file. Every time we create a PDF with it, it'll drop the background on half of all pages starting after page 24, as a random example. And that kind of bug reporting takes time to hunt down and stamp out. And one of the nice things is, we sent a link to backers for a PDF that had problems we hadn't realized were there, because we usually only check the first 20 pages to make sure that the PDF was smooth from the layout files, which we check very, very carefully. But it's easy to update PDFs. Or rather, once we have updated the PDF, which turns out to be a tremendous pain, it is easy to get a new link to backers. Once we feel backers have had a chance to settle in with the product for a while and have been rewarded for backing it so this could exist, we will eventually go to sales to the general public. Also, the print-on-demand version has to be approved, which takes time.
And, sorry, can you just remind me of what the title is?
Veranthia Codex.
Spell Veranthia.
Veranthea, and if I was wrong, Mike, I'm sorry.
Got it right on the first try.
Because all fantasy books are sexier with the word codex in them.
Oh, yeah. All right, Owen,
I think that's Felicia's fault.
We're getting ready to wrap things up. Why don't you tell us some highlights of the Owens Head hashtag movement from the last couple of weeks?
All right, so this is, as far as I can tell, your fault.
Yes.
So when I was going to be on last time, there was a illustration of my head on the warrior on the cover of the feat reference document, which was a fairly simple make an oval, slap it on there piece of art. And some people I know and some people I don't really know all thought that it was really funny to see my head on someone else's body. And the hashtag Owens Head was created. I have had my head grafted onto Dr. Doom. I had my head grafted onto Vigo from Ghostbusters 2, and as the infant that is in the picture that Vigo's picture turns into at the end of Ghostbusters 2. I have had my head grafted onto a Napoleonic general, which I now use as my icon on Facebook. And, of course, recently for this show, I had my head grafted onto a series of male strippers, which I do have to say, No Direction asked, hey, do you want to approve the next Owens Head before we put it out? And I said, no, I trust you guys. And honestly, I'm not in the least bit upset. That's the sound of my wife laughing in the background, by the way. Because while I did not suggest any of these, and I did not have any hand in their creation or tell people it was a good idea, I did promote the heck out of it. Because honestly, if people are taking the time to plaster your face on other pieces of art and create a hashtag for you, one, that's a sign of some kind of love. I'm not sure it's a healthy love. It may be the love that requires injections later, but it's some kind of love. And secondly, that's just good promotion. And, you know, yes, I'm a full-time employee at Paizo, and yes, I'm a long-term contractor with Ronin, but I still do freelance writing, and I still have places I want my career to go. So the visibility of having my own meme is not a bad thing.
And those weren't just some strippers. That's Magic Mike that you're the head on.
Yes, well, I will take your word for that, rather than try and find the specific screenshot.
You don't recognize Channing Tatum's abs?
It's the cover.
I do not recognize Channing Tatum's abs, and those life choices I'm happy with. And then my wife just rang in the background that she immediately recognized Channing Tatum's abs. And those life choices she's happy with. What I really liked about that piece was not my face, which I've seen and I don't need any more of, but that you bothered to put Boba Head's helmet and a goblin, Paizo goblin plushie on the guys in the background, which makes the whole thing look like some sort of ridiculous bobblehead geek review, which is that's good company, right? Boba Fett and a Pathfinder goblin, that's pretty iconic company to have your face being mocked in.
Yeah, when Param's the one that did this, by the way. He's the mad genius. And when he put Boba Fett on there, I was like, oh, it's because Owen used to work on the Star Wars role-playing game. And he was like, nope. No, I just put Boba Fett on there.
Yeah, no, there's an obvious connection with both of those, right? But Boba Fett's helmet just sort of looks good on everything, right? I mean, I've seen Boba Fett's helmet as the gear shift on a car. I've seen Boba Fett's helmet as a Pez dispenser, obviously. There's a Boba Head's helmet flash drive out there. It's a cool looking helmet.
Well, those obviously make more sense for Jango Fett.
Sure.
Sorry, I went for a joke. I failed.
All right, Owen, let's wrap things up by just why don't you tell us about your convention appearances for the rest of this con season?
Gen Con, that's pretty much it. I will be at the, I believe, Thursday How to Win RPG Superstar seminar for Paizo, and I'm going to be at the Ennies, so I'm a Dream Date at the Ennies, and then the rest of the time, I'm going to be a man of leisure, knocking about and doing whatever the heck sounds like a good time. So, but seriously, not to scare anyone, if you see me in the hall and you happen to recognize me, and you want to stop, say hi, or even ask me about freelance and hand me a card, feel free. And that is the only con I have left scheduled. Last year, I think I did 4 conventions in 3 months. This year, I have managed to pare it back, at least so far, to just PaizoCon and Gen Con. WorldCon is actually in Washington State in August, so that is not impossible that I would decide to take some time to drive out there, but it is like a 3-hour drive from Seattle. I was going to go to see my parents, because my mother is the Empress of the Geeks, so they will be there, but they're going to fly into Seattle, and we'll be able to have dinner with them without having to go out there, so I don't know if I'm going to do that or not. The only other con I might hit, and again, it would require exactly this right amount of time and money and effort, but there's the Great Fall Gaming Rendezvous in Great Falls, Montana, and it's a little con. That con that I did 2 years ago was one of the most fun I've ever had. So if you are anywhere near Great Falls, I strongly suggest you get a badge, go play some games, have a good time. Even if I'm not there.
And one lucky gamer at Gen Con is going to be your Dream Date?
Yes, I was in Eddie's Dream Date. They do that as a fundraiser, and I already know who it is, and everyone else will find out soon enough. So I will be doing cocktails and introducing her around, although a lot of people already know her. She gets some signed products, which is the thing that I use to drive up the price, because just spending time with me is not... I mean, people have spent $100 for an hour of my time at Gen Con. We did that at a Indiegogo campaign. And one of those people was Monica Marlowe, who's this year's RPG Superstar, and another one was Mike Myler, who now has an NE for doing the blogs with Adventure a Week and has Veranthia Codex coming out, a successful multi-$1,000 Kickstarter. So I'm not saying you should give me $100 for an hour of my time, but if you want to, it has worked out for people.
You just gave us an hour for free.
Yeah, well, I like you guys.
Ah, thanks, Owen. We're well, I guess we're done, though. Is there anything you want to shout out to? Anything we haven't had a chance to talk up yet?
So, Blue Rose Kickstarter from Green Ronin just finished. I actually don't have anything to do with Blue Rose, but it's one of the most notorious games in gaming, which is hysterical. It's going to be awesome. A lot of people I know who are brilliant writers, including Steve Kenson, who I already mentioned, Crystal Frazier, Wes Schneider, are going to be writing for it. I would, if I were you, go to the Blue Rose page at Green Ronin's website and bookmark it so that you can pre-order it, so those pre-orders are available if they're not already. And that is driven by an engine that will be based off Fantasy Age, which you can now buy on Green Ronin's website or drive-thru. It went gold on drive-thru in a week. That's how popular this thing is. It's not D20 based. It's its own unique engine. It is based off the Dragon Age engine from Green Ronin's system. I think you're going to be hearing a lot about the Age system as time goes on, and I think this is a great time to get in on it. It was also the system that was used for Will Wheaton's Titan Grave series. And both Fantasy Age and Titan's Grave will be in print at Gen Con. So if you're going to be at Gen Con and you're looking for something to buy, those are great options. I have nothing to do with those books, so... well, actually, that's not true. I guess I wrote a little tiny part in Fantasy Age, but, I mean, like, minuscule. I don't get any of the credit, but they're brilliant-looking books. I'm excited to see them, and I think a lot of people are going to have a lot of fun with them.
Excellent. Thank you once again for joining us, Owen.
Thank you for having me, guys.
We will be right back with the News Banter segment, where we are going to be bringing up Channing Tatum again, I believe, in some fashion.
What?
Right after this.
Pathfinder News. Pathfinder News. Pathfinder News.
And we're back.
Welcome back, guys. Owen, sorry I didn't tell you this ahead of time, but if you want, you can hang out with us for the rest of the episode.
But
Hang out.
oh,
You'll hang
sweet,
out? All right,
awesome,
cool.
awesome.
This is awesome.
Yeah.
Just means you're going to have to hear me espouse my opinion whenever it comes along.
Okay, we're going to talk about. Well, I guess we should just talk about it.
This year's Pathfinder Society is the Year of the Serpent. It's got a heavy Cobra influence to the villains of the year. That's the Aspis Consortium. And a lot of people know that I'm a big G.I. Joe fan, so they've come up to me with ideas for their G.I. Joe themed characters, or looking for advice for G.I. Joe themed characters. And so, the first banter segment, I am just going to go nuts to the wall and say, we are just going to talk about G.I. Joe. And we're going to have a lot of fun. There's a couple of different ways I can picture doing this. I can either talk about famous characters and say how to bring them into Pathfinder, or talk about Pathfinder stuff and say which G.I. Joes fit that the best. So what I'm going to do is turn to the audience. Anyone that is listening now, if there's any specific G.I. Joe stuff you want to know about, just say it. You can just say, like, Duke, and I will give you all my thoughts on Duke and how to bring him into the Pathfinders, how to make a Pathfinder Society character based on him. So while we wait for people to come in with suggestions, I'm going to start at the obvious point, and that is with Snake Eyes. Oh, my Snake Eyes keeps dropping his Uzi. So Snake Eyes is both one of the most complicated characters you could make for Pathfinder Society, and one of the easiest, because there's been a lot of different interpretations to Snake Eyes. So he is often associated with timber, so if you want to make him some kind of a hunter, then that makes sense. He's just an ultimate fighter. He comes with an animal companion that's like a wolf. So easy enough. And he is a two-weapon fighter. He uses his Uzi and a sword. So for feats-wise, you can give him two-weapon fighting, a hand crossbow, and a sword. And that would be a unique build. It would be, I believe, a lot of fun. You can do a little bit of range stuff, a little bit of in-your-face melee stuff. The challenge for Snake Eyes is that he's 100% mute. So, how would you roleplay a mute character? And I've thought about this. I don't really know.
Oh,
Well, I
yes.
do.
What's that?
I know how you do it.
How do you do it,
It's
Owen?
in bluff. Because with bluff, you can send secret messages.
Interesting. All right, and there's also, I believe sign language is actually a language that you can legally take, but I don't know if it's
There's-
Pathfinder Society legal.
There is a Pathfinder Society sign language. I don't know if it's PFS legal or not. That's certainly an option. And if it is, and you got it, of course, you can see if you can pick up enough use magic device and a wand for share language. The other thing you can do, obviously, is just not talk a lot, because honestly, usually everyone else at the table will be able to handle what needs to be done, and if you are simply efficiently following through the will of the group and doing a good job at it, I don't think people are going to mind yapping.
And actually, at first when you said the share thoughts thing, I was like, oh, but that's cheating. Snake Eyes never did that. But that's not true. Everyone else always seemed to know what Snake Eyes was thinking. And that is exactly how you would portray that. And it fits in with his, like, he's on top of, I called him a hunter. That's the most basic way to go. But he's also a mystical ninja. And so that completely works with taking use magic device. It'll give you a lot of opportunity to just be like, well, now's the time for a little bit of mystic ninja magic. You make your use magic device roll and pull out a scroll, do whatever crazy thing the situation calls for right there and then.
Also, carry a small white erase board and a marker with you, and claim you've got a chalkboard and chalk.
Make it a red dry erase marker and say you're just writing it in Cobra blood.
Yeah, there you go.
All right, we've already got a shout out from the audience. Kilrex wants to know about Flint. Flint and Duke, I would say, have basically the same build because there was a lot of redundancy in the officers in G.I. Joe. For basically every year, Hasbro wanted to have a leader character come out, and until they started reusing some of them, they introduced a new leader of G.I. Joe every year. So Flint and Duke, there is very little difference between them. You can say that Flint's a little bit more of a in the field in your face kind of leader, and Duke was a little bit take further back, but really no. Flint and Duke will have the exact same build, and I would say Paladin's probably the best build. It's self-sufficient, which both of them have proven to be, but it also can aid the other allies. He's a support leader, and that seems perfect for both of them.
Wasn't Flint a U.S. Army Ranger?
Flint was a warrant officer,
Okay.
which to this day, even though Flint is my favorite character, I don't know exactly what a warrant officer does.
It's a level of non-com. I would be inclined to make Flint a ranger, because it seems like he always knew what he was doing out in the wilds a little more than perhaps other people did. As for Duke, the one thing I'd be sure to do is I would give Duke the bodyguard feat and some similar options, because it kept seeing like Duke got shot instead of someone else. And you could emulate that by having the feats to get shot instead of someone else.
He did take a stake to his heart instead of Falcon. That would
Exactly.
be a perfect way of doing that. Now, I would argue against making Flint a ranger, because ranger is actually a type of military officer, and a lot of G.I. Joes are rangers. Stalker, repeater. Wow, there's way more than that, and those are the only two I'm thinking of right now. But, like, ranger is an easy fit, whereas Flint, I think, would need to be something a little more of a boss.
Okay, well, I've got one for you, Ryan.
Go for it.
Captain Gridiron.
Captain Gridiron. Okay. Once upon a time, I had dreams of making a base class that was just sport player, and I would have all kinds of fake fantasy sports and then ways to make that a martial character. So in a dream world where I actually published this thing, and somehow it was Pathfinder Society legal, Captain Gridiron would be a sports player. But taking a step back, Captain Gridiron was one of those leader characters, so he would have to be some kind of supporty role. I don't think a bard is quite appropriate for Captain Gridiron. The other
Did
thing,
Captain Gridiron wear armor?
he wore a little bit of armor, more than most, and it had like a football theme to it. And one of his main weapons was football grenades.
I would be really tempted to write him up as a war priest of Caden Kalenian, focusing on the feats of strength aspect. That would allow him to go out and do martial stuff, but that war priest spell list will also allow him to pull off the leader support material.
I like it.
Now,
I like it mechanically, but why Caden? Like, why would Caden work with Captain Gridiron?
Well, going out, being Wahoo, having a good time, and performing feats of strength. That's pretty close to Captain Gridiron's description, right? And yes, we don't know a lot about the religion of G.I. Joe characters, but if you're translating them to Gorlarian, then it would make sense that they would in fact have backgrounds that would connect to the gods of that realm. So if a football player or military guy is going to worship one of the Golarian gods, right, it won't be Nethys. And I think it makes the most... For a military group that might have a football game that will be interrupted by a terrorist attack, that they will cheerfully lob footballs made of iron at their foes to take them down, that sounds like Caden Kalian to me.
Not only did they get the game interrupted by a terrorist organization, they then started playing against that terrorist organization. Alright, Rich Flynn has probably the easiest one of them all. He's asking me about Budo. Budo is G.I. Joe's samurai, because you cannot have a special military unit without a samurai. He is full-on a samurai. He has a sword, a full suit of armor, the samurai helmet. I would make him a samurai, Rich. The Cavalier alternate class. Any objections to Budo as a samurai?
No, that one's really easy.
Yeah, that's pretty clear.
Mamarsula, and I think I've pronounced this differently every time I've said it, she wants, and I also have been assuming that it's a she for some reason. Anyway.
So that's Mama Ursula, and that is RPG superstar Monica Marlowe.
Oh.
I suspected it might be for almost no reason, but there was just something Monica about it.
That's also her Paizo sign-in.
Oh, okay.
So you probably made that connection at the time.
All right, she wants to know about Shipwreck, and this is actually one of the characters I have had some trouble with. Because when I think of Shipwreck, I mean, as a sailor, I guess you could go with some kind of ranger or druid and have it focus on water stuff or favored terrain out at sea. Pirate is a pretty obvious choice that just hit me, so a pirate rogue would be pretty good. And a little bit of something like the Mesmerist or some kind of bard that specializes in debuffing. That also seems appropriate, because Shipwreck's also a trash talker. But for the most part, no, I think you're better off taking a rogue with one of the pirate archetypes. Now, for role-playing Shipwreck, the advice that was given to Neil Ross, I believe was the voice actor, was that Shipwreck is written like Popeye, but played like Jack Nicholson.
Okay, let's go with one of the pet-focused ones, Crocmaster.
Crocmaster. See, I was only focusing on G.I. Joe.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Because the Cobras, well, they were going to be part of the Aspis.
Oh.
And I guess Crocmaster could defect to G.I. Joe. And since you brought him up, we'll do Crocmaster, but in the future I want to focus more on the good guys. So, Crocmaster, I would say, is a ranger. His entire role is he is the security of Cobra Island. So he and crocodiles, completely voluntarily, by the way. He was not ever officially hired by Cobra. He just showed up one day with his crocodiles and said he would look after the island for them. Yeah, so it's a ranger. You make sure you get an animal companion. I don't know if crocodile is available to most rangers. I don't think it is. But surely there's an archetype that lets you take a crocodile.
I wouldn't guarantee that.
Yeah,
you might actually be better off going druid.
Okay, and you know what? There's not so much about Crocmaster that we couldn't assume that he's got some magical powers, and his relationship with the crocodiles is more than just training them. So yeah, I think he's one of the safer people that we could actually go druid with.
Well, he always has his head, so he could be a summoner, and that's his eidolon.
Interesting.
And then when there's a whole bunch of crocodiles involved, that's just him summoning a whole bunch of crocodiles.
I like that. Summoner is not one of the classes that I had any idea how to apply, and magic is a big challenge for this, because it's super easy to find rangers and nature guys and straight up warriors, but the arcane classes were a big challenge, and I think Crocmaster is one of the ones that we can make an exception and say he's a little bit more magical than you might think. Summoner, I like it, Param. I'm going down the chat. Bard Wannabe says that it is PFS legal to take sign language because there are deaf oracles.
Oh.
So there we go. That is a great way of handling Snake Eyes. One of his languages, make it sign language. Now, Justin Sluter says Snake Eyes is a talented monk. Now, I've put a lot of thought into this. I would say if you're going to make a monk, your monk would be Quick Kick. Whereas Snake Eyes would lean more towards either just a straight fightery type character or a ninja. He would multi-class, but he would take levels of ninja. Whereas Storm Shadow or Kamakura or Jinx or any of Ninja Force, they would be straight ninjas.
And I suspect when he says talented monk, he's referring to the Genius Guide to the Talented Monk, which isn't PFS legal anyway.
That's a good point. The Unchained Monk is, which maybe he was just giving you Talented Monk as a little shout out. All right, Twilight Knight wants to know about Gung Ho. Gung Ho, I think, is one of the better examples of a barbarian. So rather than a straight fighter, Gung Ho was one of the people that got a little bit frothier at the mouth. He is one of the people that was more likely to just let his emotions take over for him. He wasn't any kind of an officer. He was just there for the fight. And you could point him in the right direction, and he would follow orders whenever he could. But sometimes he lost it. He went straight into a rage. I think I would just go with a straight barbarian or an unchained barbarian for Gung Ho. I don't think there's any one archetype that I think of that really makes me think, oh, that's the crazy Cajun grenade launcher dude.
I might suggest Urban Barbarian.
That's fair. Although he grew up in the Bayou. He's one of the least urban by G.I. Joe standards.
Yes, but he's a lot more urban than a typical barbarian by barbarian.
Good point.
True. Now there is another character that I want to that I would make a barbarian out of, and specifically it would be a Mad Dog barbarian, and that is Mutt. Now Mutt, the action figure, came with a muzzle. Mutt also came with a dog Junkyard, but the muzzle didn't fit Junkyard. The muzzle fit Mutt. The muzzle fit the guy in charge of the dog. And really, there's nothing more perfect than the guy who gets so mad at you that he might bite you, and he comes with a dog, being a Mad Dog Barbarian. In fact, I kind of regret that the Mad Dog Barbarian doesn't get a bite attack as a class feature.
Well, he's muzzled, so why would he? Okay, nobody's named this one yet, and I'm surprised. Pathfinder.
Huh. What would Pathfinder be? Oh, do I have access to Pathfinder that I can just show people? Oh, you know what? I do have Mark Balamo's Ultimate Guide to G.I. Joe. So while I think over Pathfinder, I'll also try and track down a picture of him. So, Pathfinder is known for, he's got basically a ripsaw glaive. He's got 2 hip-mounted chainsaws with a rotary blade at the end. So I can definitely tell you that equipment-wise, he would need a ripsaw glaive. If he could dual-wield ripsaw glaives, that would be wonderful, but that would be just impossible. Beyond that... nope, that's not him, that's Muskrat. Again, I'm leaning towards Ranger because he is kind of tied into a specific environment. If I wanted to get outside of Ranger, I would probably go with one of the hybrid classes that has a couple of levels of Ranger to it. So, I was going to say Slayer, but I think Slayer is a little bit more sneaky, and there's nothing sneaky about a guy walking around with 2 chainsaws tied to his hips.
Well, sorry to burst your effort here, but Google was our friend, and I've got Pathfinder up on the screen right now.
That is much smarter than what I'm doing, because I still have not found Pathfinder. 1989, was he a 19... Oh, he was a 90s character. Well, I'm going to have this handy, because this is the second 1990 character that you mentioned, Param, so I suspect that might be a year you have an affinity for.
Yeah, that's back when I was into Joe's.
Alright, are you satisfied with Pathfinder as either a hunter or a ranger with a ripsaw glaive?
I would assume Slayer.
You would go with Slayer?
Yeah.
Sell me on it. Why?
Well, because he mostly focused on ambush tactics, and I mean, he did lead a lot of the assaults, but he mostly was out there on his own, and he had a very focused enemy and mostly combat oriented.
All right, that's fair.
I would have been tempted to go with Ranger and then make him a trap building Ranger, because he does ambush tactics a lot, and traps are one of the good ways to do ambush tactics.
Oh, hey, Alex Agunas has a pretty interesting shipwreck build in chat. A human gunslinger with the Buccaneer archetype.
Oh man, I can't believe we're not using Gunslinger more. And these are...
Gunslinger I was reserving for anyone that's just, like, so associated with their gun that you can't not choose Gunslinger.
And we can use Sorcerer for half of these things, because what are laser guns but magic wands?
That's true. Or actually, with the Kineticist coming out, you can have a blowtorch is just a pyrokineticist.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, clearly.
Lucas VCNE says a brawler. Well, there is no brawler quite like Big Brawler. Big Brawler brawls big time. He was actually the the inspiration for my Brawler character, well, half the inspiration, since my Brawler character is also a sumo, which Big Brawler is not. But to give you a little backstory, and I believe it was 2000, they released the Collector series, which here we've got summarized in the Real American Hero Second Generation O-Ring G.I. Joe Action Figures collection by James Cavanaugh Jr. And Big Brawler was basically Outback from the neck down, but with the worst file card ever written. It was the most Mary Sue of file cards. Here's Big Brawler. And it just talks about how Big Brawler is good at everything, and that he will fight you and punch you and beat you no matter what. And Big Brawler basically became a mascot for JoeCustoms.com, which I'm a moderator of. And I have fond memories of these terrible Big Brawler memes that we were creating. We can just keep going. Kurges? A couple of people have asked for Kurges, and I don't know what that is.
Huh. I don't know that one either, if you don't, so...
Kurgess, unless that's the He-Man like Barbarian from the first... Oh, no. That's... Kurges is something from Pathfinder, a demigod associated with healthy competition, sport, and physical development. Oh, okay, so...
People were suggesting it for...
Captain Gridiron.
Oh, okay.
The strongman. Okay. I concur.
Right. Any more suggestions from chat for anybody to Pathfinder up from Ryan?
Rich Flynn asked for Tunnel Rat, and actually Lucas, who just asked about the Brawlers, he has shown me his Tunnel Rat build. He is completely committed to playing Tunnel Rat in Pathfinder Society this year, which I think is just awesome. And his build was, he will be an unchained rogue trap specialist with favored terrain underground.
Again, that's hard to argue with.
Owen, do you have any favorite Joes?
So I'm a child of the G.I. Joe animated show from the 80s, right? So the classic ones we've sort of covered. If I was going to mention one, I think I would be interested in talking about probably Lady J.
Lady J. Okay, so Lady J is, the way she was portrayed in the cartoon, she was like the javelin specialist, and her javelins, she could swap the heads and have them do different explosive effects. So immediately I am thinking of an alchemist.
Yep.
Probably a grenadier or some other bomb specialist alchemist, because she doesn't have the science aspect of that, but she definitely has the explosions at range aspect of it. Now, here's a little thing though, she was also kind of a master of disguise, so I'm wondering if maybe an investigator might be the better fit for her than a straight up alchemist. The theme fits better.
It might work better.
Do all investigators get bombs, or do you need to take an archetype for it?
No, I think... I ought to know that immediately, and I don't.
Yeah,
Alex will have answered by the time I look it up.
You've got a delay on your side, but he'll probably have answered before he hears it.
Well, just any...
funny enough, Bard Wannabe asked at the same time for Lady J. Although he says Lady Jane. Come on, Bard Wannabe. Well, Alex does say investigators do not get bombs.
Yeah, see? Told you he'd know before I did. And that was the answer I thought, but...
Is there no kind of investigator that gets bombs?
Well, they don't need it, because if all you're worried about is the sky stuff, all alchemists know all themselves.
Right, but it's disguise and throwing bombs at people. So what we're looking for is some kind of investigator archetype that swaps out mutagen for the bombs.
Alternatively, you could take the Steel Hound, which gives you some gunslinging options, and have those replace the explosive javelin.
Yeah, I can see that working. So then the question is what she gains from taking investigator with a little bit of gunslinger enough for the stuff that doesn't fit for the alchemist? I would say yes. Thinking over Lady J, she spent a lot of time in costume and undercover. So yeah, I would say that the investigator is a much better fit for her.
That said, do the alchemists get disguise self?
I don't know.
Because if they do, that might go back to making alchemists make more sense.
Okay.
You just have your elixir list focus on the things that cover that class doesn't necessarily.
They do get alter self, which will let them disguise herself.
They also get disguise self at first level.
Yeah, so I go back to thinking Alchemist is a better fit.
Okay. Well, then how about this? If people are interested in making Lady J, they've got options.
Alex Agunas is suggesting in great detail Unchained Underground Chemist Rogue.
I like it.
Alright.
See, I was just thinking I might go Grenadier because you get a chemical weapon at second level.
Which makes a lot of sense.
Use a weapon or piece of ammunition with a single harmful chemical, liquid, or powder.
Twilight Knight has asked about Wild Bill. So personality-wise, he seems to be like the prototypical gunslinger. But if we were to go a little bit larger than that, you could kind of say he's a southern gentleman with a rather large mount, and I'm wondering if Wild Bill could make a decent cavalier. Especially a cavalier that takes amateur gunslinger.
Well, I was thinking maybe he could be a holy gun.
A holy gun. Okay. I like what you're thinking, but I'd like to hear your thoughts.
Okay, so like any of the Joes, they have this ridiculous moral compass that they have to abide by, lock solid. And holy gun, I was you do give up the horse, but then he can just get the horse anyway. And sorry, I guess I was just like really wanting the smite pistol because you've got the stormtrooper syndrome going on, and he might be the only one that can hit anything.
Well, yeah, there are other ways of getting horses, including horses as animal companions. He won't get the full mount treatment, but I think, yes, he actually, for the vehicle drivers, he's one of the few guys that I could still figure out how to make him as a character, because he had a lot of character beyond just being the helicopter pilot. He was the cowboy. And so, Holy Gun, I like your mix of the paladin and the gunslinger there.
Alright.
Now, I'm going to assume this one's a little bit more obscure, so I'm going to show the picture. This is Psych Out. He is the battlefield psychologist, and he is basically the mesmerist to a T.
Yeah.
These little radars that he comes with, these are all paranoia-inducing, like, subsonic waves. And that was his specialty. He would go out there and he would mess with the fear levels and just mess with the heads of all the cobras that are out there. And those that he didn't mess with using his technology, he was also a skilled psychiatrist, so he could also just mess with your head with his words. He basically has multiple ways of messing with your head. And the mesmerist, as the resident debuffer class, when it comes out, perfectly Psych Out. Even the name fits perfectly with a mesmerist.
Alex has again corrected me, informing me that Killrex actually beat him to it. Holy Gun's not PFS legal. It doesn't have the gunsmithing class feature, and in PFS you can't buy guns without it.
Huh. That's good to know, and it's good to have Alex and other people in the chat keeping us honest.
Yeah. I mean, otherwise you guys might believe we know what we're talking about.
I'm going to take an opportunity to let G.I. Joe explain the difference between a cleric and an oracle. Doc would be a cleric. Doc is a medical physician. He works best when he's sitting down there with all the right equipment in the medical bay. He's able to analyze you, and he's the one that can solve your problem today, tomorrow. Whereas Lifeline would be more of an oracle, specifically a life oracle, because Lifeline is a medic. He is out on the battlefield, and his main purpose there is to solve whatever your problem is right now with a limited number of tools. So to solve your problem now with the best tools that are available at the moment. So Lifeline being more someone that has to improvise with a limited number of things. He is an oracle, and you can take the oracle with the burned hand curse, the one that really makes you a poor choice in combat, because Lifeline's main characteristic for every version of him except for the action figure and its file card is that Lifeline is a pacifist. He refuses to wield a weapon or to actually attack anyone in combat. In the comics, he had a martial art, which was cool. It was all defensive, so if someone attacked him, he would just throw you over his shoulder and just walk away. And in the comics, in the cartoon, they went into great detail about how he refuses to touch a weapon to even help Lift Ticket repair the guns on the Tomahawk, because that goes against his pacifist code.
I would be very tempted for either of them to instead go with a Churgeon Alchemist, which gets very, very close to a field medic.
Okay, so then why would Doc be a Churgeon?
Well, Doc's still, and it's still a matter of using technology and chemical materials to fix problems. And you can have all of the necessary knowledge, skills, and analysis to figure out what things are, work on prepping up this great extract for later, but the very feel for I am a doctor or I am a medic, I think, comes closer to playing a Churgeon than anything that depends on spells.
I would agree with that, except that, well, and then just the other side, the other way of looking at it is that their primary function is healing and helping, and so the parallel would be a divine caster. But yeah, if you want to make it feel like Doc came from G.I. Joe and just showed up in your Pathfinder game, then it makes more sense to go with the Alchemist, because it is science-based, just like Doc and Lifeline did in...
Well, and the Churgeon archetype specifically focuses on healing and helping.
We haven't brought up Roadblock yet. I had some thoughts on how to build a Roadblock, because what's cool about Roadblock is that, yes, he's a ranged fighter, he's a weapons specialist, but people, of the many things that people think about when they think of Roadblock, they just think about how big he is, and that he would carry around a weapon that was usually too big for a human to carry. It was supposed to be a tank-mounted weapon, but he can carry it around with his own two hands. That's actually a cool parallel to a composite longbow, which gives you a bonus to damage based on your strength. So he would actually be a strength-based archery character, an archer of some kind. And he uses a heavy machine gun, which is more about peppering the battlefield with as many shots as possible rather than being accurate. So again, you can have a low dex, a high strength, and as many feats and whatever options can get you multiple shots. So he would just be just a brawny archer. And that's not the first thing people think about when they think of archers, but as soon as you say, like, no, I'm Roadblock, I'm the heavy machine gunner, and I am just going to nail you with as many and as big arrows as possible. And I would go with fighter, because you're going to need as many feats as you can to really maximize your shots and maximize your to hit and your damage.
It's sort of unfortunate that the Titan Fighter archetype doesn't work with ranged weapons, because if it did, you could take it and give him a size large longbow to get that giant weapon too big for other people to handle aspect, but it won't actually work. So for a home game, if I were GM, I would totally buy that if we were trying to make G.I. Joe characters in Pathfinder, but for PFS, you have to actually use the rules as written, so... And
if you do manage to find a way to get enough intelligence to get some flavorful feat points, Roadblock was a chef. Now I'm going to have a little bit of a rant. I enjoyed not Rise of Cobra, sorry, G.I. Joe Retaliation? No. Yes, G.I. Joe Retaliation. The second one, the one with Roadblock as the Rock. But one thing that I will never forgive it for is that they turned Rock from a chef, which was what he was associated with up until the movie, to a Cajun cook. And what bothered me about this is that Roadblock's always been shown as a upper class type of guy. He's got really specialized taste. Usually if he ever mentioned a recipe by name, it was a French recipe. And I think they hurt that side of him by just making him a cook. Like, no, he is a chef. He is a man who is passionate about food and like good food, quality food. Whereas Cajun food is delicious, but it's also like a food of the people. And I just did not see that as Roadblock's character. So that was just a little rant that I had to,
also, I'll be honest,
put out there.
It feels like it was an attempt to make a less diverse choice, right? He looks more like what you think of as a Cajun chef. And I think that's an unfortunate stereotype. So I think it was also a backwards choice in having integrated, interesting, diverse characters in the setting.
Yeah.
I think it was a cheap, easy choice.
I could not agree with that more. Like, they also made him like a gang leader, which is very much Stalker's backstory from the comics. And the fact that they had enough African-American characters in G.I. Joe that you can have some representing certain stereotypes, some representing others, and also all of these characters going against those stereotypes. It was nice. It broadened up who these G.I. Joe characters was. It's one of the things that I love the most about G.I. Joe, just the diversity of the characters and going against a lot of expectations. And so, yeah, just making him making him a gang leader, Cajun chef. It was not the roadblock that I grew up with. I've actually got someone in my my home game plans on playing roadblock in Pathfinder Society, and he plans on rhyming the entire time.
Oh goodness! Like even out of character attacks.
No, whenever he's speaking in character. Although
I would give him bonus points for managing to declare his attacks in rhyme.
I would love to, but it's Pathfinder Society, Para. He'll be playing the roadblock character only in Year of the Serpent games. Now, this is Matt, and normally I would say, no, that's absurd, there's no way he's doing this. But he actually played a Vow of Silence monk for like a 15-level campaign, and he only spoke once on purpose, and it was his attempt to save the group from in a situation that required someone to talk from his point of view. So I think he's up to the challenge, and I look forward to being at the same table as him when he's playing his roadblock character. I'm not actually sure what his build is. I want to talk to him about that.
Well, my pitch for a character that I'd like to try, and this one might be cheating a little bit, Ryan, so feel free to smack me on the head because you declared no cobras, but I would do Storm Shadow as a magus.
Ooh, interesting. Now, Storm Shadow's fully acceptable because he defected to G.I. Joe.
That's what I was going to say. And he would be a former Shadow Lodger to reflect his continued back and forth defection, not defections, and would allow me to really explore some of the alignment issues. And then he was always the more mystical, mysterious of the ninjas, so to have some actual magic backing him up would apply.
And I think that would be an amazing build too, like a ninja-themed magus. What would you get, a katana? What would some of the details be?
Okay, you would have to get a katana. That's not even a question, right?
Right.
And other than that, I have no clue what my build would be for him, man.
I would strongly recommend a Kensei Magus, which will dial back on the spell elements a little bit, but that's fine because you only want some mysticism, and will give you things like canny defense and other weapon-related options, which will make you look more like a ninja. And obviously, you pick up the katana as your weapon of choice, and you put all of your feats and options into that. I think it would work really well.
Killrex wants to know which G.I. Joe would be vigilantes. The best fit, I think, would be Chuckles. He's an undercover officer, and if you've read G.I. Joe Cobra, which was just an amazing miniseries, one of the best comics that IDW has ever put out, period, and one of the best undercover officers or undercover agent comic books you'll ever read, because it really goes into the things that you have to do to fit in with the bad guys. And it just Chuckles, who they decided that he's named Chuckles because he's not a guy that takes many things seriously, slowly breaking as he has to pretend to be a Cobra while staying a Joe. It's just a fascinating comic book. It's a 4-issue series. They made sequels, but really if you just read the first one, actually it might be a 6-issue series. Anyway, if you just read the first one, I think you'll enjoy it very much. And that's a lot of how I see the vigilante internalizing the dual identity. So, of all the characters, I can see him being one. I had an idea for a second vigilante that is escaping me right now, which is bumming me out, because I was really excited when it came to me earlier. No, it's not happening. Oh, I'm sad. Lucas says Zartan for G.I. Joe was his suggestion for a vigilante. There is a Zartan of G.I. Joe. His name is Mirage. I've got him on my shelf, so I'll grab him quickly. Aha. So this is Mirage. He was one of the Mega Marines. And then this is Invisible Mirage, which makes him one of my favorite figures. Because as I often mention whenever we're talking about Pathfinder Battles figures, I love translucent plastic. I love it so much for no logical reason.
Is this
but
why?
Man,
is this why you have?
Mirage.
Is this why you haven't painted your Hero Forge figure yet?
No, that's because I'm really behind on my miniature painting. Oh, fun trivia about this miniature is that you'll see that he's got his details are still painted up, even though the rest of them's clear. They originally made him clear, and they were having trouble keeping track of them at the factory. So they had to paint details just so there's enough contrast so that they can open it up and know what they're looking at and count it a little more easily.
All right. Well, we've got a lot to talk about Gen Con. Is there any last minute G.I. Joe-ness that we need to throw in?
Yes, I haven't talked about my character that I'll be running
yes,
the
of
Pathfinder
course.
Society, Sergeant Slaughter. And I am making him a skald.
What?
He's basically a bard, but a violent bard. A bard that motivates you through violence to be violent.
No, Skald as a drill sergeant is perfect.
Yep. It is a class that I never thought I would play. I just couldn't really wrap my head around it until I was conceiving of a character that I knew I could roleplay very well, since, as a picture on my Facebook wall that people can find, I went to Sergeant Slaughter for Halloween.